everyone, it's Anne Bounty from Said With Love and welcome to week 1 of the Just a Tree quilt along. And this week we're going to be selecting our fabrics, choosing not just what's going to be on the tree portion, but your background, your binding and also your backing. And as we talked about in the introduction, you can use whatever fabrics you like. I've used sort of pinks and reds for this original one to be sort of a bit more Christmassy sort of looking. But during this sew along, I'm going to be using Orchard by April Rosenthal. And it's just a lovely spring colours of fruit and greens and pinks and a bit of navy and just really bright saturated colours. It's going to be lovely. And I'm going to be using some low volume as the background. Bit similar to this, but this one has some pinks and pops of reds and things into the low volumes. This one I'm sticking pretty much with greys, whites, off-whites, etc. The backing, I'm going to use April's main print from her Homestead collection, which is fairly similar but not quite the exact same as this main print on the charm pack, but it will go beautifully together and it will look lovely on the back. And I'm actually going to use this aqua or mint dot because one of the prints in here, let me see if I can find it, let's see whether you can see it, cute little cherries, I think, yeah, cherries, but it's got that little aqua dot on the background, so that's going to be my binding. So I've made my fabric choices. They're not really matchy-matchy in that this aqua mint is just slightly different than what's in the actual charm pack, but overall it's going to look fine and I've made my decisions, so that's perhaps the hardest part. So let's see what you're going to choose to make for your Just a Tree. Okay, so here we are ready to start doing our cutting. Now all the cutting details are in the PDF pattern that you will have received when you signed up to join the sew along. The link to that will be down in the underneath this video. But basically a charm pack, some binding and some low volume strips, and obviously then your backing once we get to that. So let's get started on cutting. So let's get cutting. So I've got a number of different strips here of the low volumes that I'm going to be using, and I'm going to cut each of those into, I can't remember how many I counted. We'll figure that out in just a second. And then start subcutting my strips. So there's 2 sizes that we need to be creating out of the background strips, and we need 10 of the smaller size and 66 of the bigger size. So I'm just going to cut each strip into the bigger size and then every now and then cut a couple of the smaller size as well. Okay, next one. Just repeat this until you've got your 66 pieces. I'm starting over here to just put them into piles of 10 just so that I can keep track of what one I'm up to. But it's just a bit of kind of mindless cutting. It's just nice, something to do when you're not too worried about everything, but not so tired that you're going to cut yourself or make mistakes. It's my rule. Don't quilt and cut when you're really tired, because you spend more time fixing the mistakes that you make. Getting close. Just got a few more to do. Okay, so there are my 66 background rectangles and then my 10 smaller rectangles. I've actually got a little bit more than 10 because I want to just give myself some variety when I start to put it together. So I can now put those aside and we can start cutting the charm pack. With the charm pack, let me just open that up and take the backing cardboard, etc. off. With the charm pack, we want to open it up and start matching up your 5-inch squares in pairs, and we want good contrast. So something like that green with the white would be fantastic, because what we're going to do is then put these together, cut them into this tree shape, and then flip the middle tree bit out from the white to be into the green. So you end up with a white tree in the green background and a green tree in the white background. So you need lots of contrast between the two of them. So I might pair those two up. Now we've got some more greens and these lighter ones. As I said before, I might have a little bit of concern when it comes to some of these lighter ones because my background is fairly light, but we will see. Now something like that is going to look awesome. Good high contrast. Those cherries are just so cute. Cherries and apples, I might put that. I'm sure there'll be something really red. That might be a lovely one. Yep, we'll put those two together. And look, it's really personal preference. I try and go through quite quickly and pair them up and then go back and go, oh, I've got, 2 of these left and these are not got much contrast, and I'll tweak a little bit, but try not to think terribly hard and long about it. It's kind of supposed to be fun, so let's have some fun putting things together. Okay, so I've paired all my charms up, my 5-inch squares. Now there is one that I need to, well, 2 charms that I, 2 5-inch squares that I need to pull out because I need to use them as the trunks for all my trees. I'm not 100% sure what I'll use. I could use this sort of lighter beigey one, but I've only got one of that print, so maybe I won't, because it might be nice to have a bit of consistency across those trunks. But I'm starting to think that I might take these very, very pale tone on tone ones out and not use them at all, and then I can pair those two together and get completely different fabric from my stash to do the trunks. So I think that might be the best way around, not having this low volume in my charms that is almost the same as my background. So I'm going to take those out of my charm pack. I've then paired up everything else, and now I need to go into my stash and find a fabric that will work for the little trunks of the trees. Okay, so this is where having a really big stash can be helpful. So I actually don't have any more of April's fabrics in my stash, unfortunately, because that's perhaps where I would have started first to look for something that would coordinate. That's perhaps a little bit of a darker of this greyish, the grey beige kind of colour or something like that. So I then just went to my stash and started looking, and I was just picking out anything. So, there was this grey that has these red crosses, and it's just a bit, I don't know, a bit too modern, a bit too wrong. So that goes. I then picked out, I think this is a bit of Laurie Holt, and it's brown, it's a trunk. And it's okay, but it's got a bit too much green in it. So that one's going out. I then found a couple more of Laurie Holt's, which are just slightly lighter browns and just nice sort of backgroundy kind of things. And these are okay. They're different enough, but still in that same feel, I suppose. And at this point I go, they're not singing to me. So we'll just put them there for a second. And then I went and found Big Sky, I think this is from, and sort of found three prints from that. And I actually prefer these. They're not sort of that quite warm brown. They're a bit of a cooler brown. They're sort of matching more of this greyish kind of colour. I think that one might be a bit too dark, though it would work. I think that one's going to be a little bit too pale because it might be just not enough difference from my background. But this one I think could work. It matches sort of quite nicely with that, but it's got a nice sort of pattern to it. So I'm down to choosing between those two, and what I might do is cut out one tree, cut out one of these, and just sort of see which is going to be best. But I've narrowed my trunk fabric down. Okay, so I've paired up all my charms so that they're sitting right sides facing both up, and we'll do our cutting that way. Now, if you've got directional prints, like this one is a cherries, so it has a direction, make sure that you've got them both in the correct direction that you want to have your tree, because we'll be cutting our tree sort of in this way, so you don't want your cherries upside down. Or is that just me? And the other thing too, if you've got sort of like a big floral, try and find where the focal point or the interesting bit of the fabric is sort of either in the middle or down the bottom, so that when you're cutting out your tree, you're going to cut out, you know, the important or the interesting part of that fabric. So we've got that. Okay, so the very first thing we need to do is to cut off a 1-inch strip off the bottom. Remembering the directional print, we want it to come off the bottom. So I'm just going to turn mine and measure my 1 inch. Cut that. So those are two still together and this bit is still together. And then I'm going to cut this in half. So it's 5 inches, so a 2.5 inch cut. And what this is going to do when we put our trunk piece in there, it allows us, and we've got some extra fabric, as you can see, even when we sew this together, we've got a little bit. We'll be able to actually move that trunk a little bit across the tree. So if we've got a real wonky tree, you can move your trunk over a bit further this way. If you want in the middle, you can put it in the middle, or you can move it a bit over to one side. So that's what that allows us to do. So we'll just pop those two pieces apart. And then the next thing we need to do is actually cut the tree. Now, Diary of a Quilter has got a great tutorial on this. This is where the tree portion of this comes from. I do it slightly differently than her in terms of the trimming, the cutting and then the trimming. So feel free to go and check out her tutorial. I'll put a link of that down the bottom of this video as well. I kind of come in, and remembering we want these to look a little bit different. We don't want them to be exactly the same the whole time. So we're going to come in a little bit, about 1 inch, who knows, and somewhere up in the middle, and we're going to cut once. We're going to move that piece apart so that we don't cut it again, and we're going to then make the other cut in a similar way. You don't want to be closer than 1/4 inch. You've got to be at least 1/4 inch, if not 1/2 inch away. But your tree doesn't have to be perfectly symmetrical. It can be a tall, skinny one. It can be a fat one. It can be whatever you want. So I'm just going to do that, okay? So then we have our two parts of that, the tree and our base down the bottom. And what we do is then swap that middle piece so that it goes on the bottom. So we now have a red tree and white bits. And then if we take this away, we've got a white tree in red background. So by pairing up those charms, we get good contrast in both of our trees. So here's my little test of my tree trunk fabric. So I've just cut some little 1-inch squares of the lighter one and the darker one, and I think I'm going to go with the darker one, just because it looks a little bit more trunk-like and just that little bit more contrast. So we've decided to go with the darker one of those. So go ahead and cut all of your trees. I would be very tempted to just leave them as they're when you cut them, so that they stay together nicely. And in fact, I would then probably pop them onto one of the little design boards, and you can pile them up as high as you want. They'll stay nice and safe, and in fact, once you've got quite a few there, you can put another design board on top and they won't fly off or go anywhere. And we can just pile up all of our trees ready for next week, which is the sewing. We've just got the binding to cut and the backing to cut, and I'll show you that in a second. Ready to cut my binding. Now I cut my binding at 2¼ inches wide. I just find that fits a bit better. It doesn't have as much fabric going around the back of the binding. But if you want to, you can cut them at 2½ inches. You'll just perhaps have a bit more binding going over the backing of your fabric, of your project. And trying to remember how many strips I have to cut. I will work that out in a second. But I think this binding is going to be cute. It's nothing like, it's a dot and a stripe. You can never go wrong with either of those. And if you're really desperate for trying to figure out what to do for your binding, a black and white stripe pretty much goes with everything. Okay, so there are my 5 strips ready to make some binding. Pop that over there, and now we get to cut some backing. I've measured out my 1½ yards of my backing fabric, and oh gosh, it is so pretty. That one's going to be lovely. So very nice. It's not, it's kind of directional, so I'll have to keep a bit of an eye on that. But I'm not so fussy about a wall hanging backing because most of the time it's going to be hanging up on a wall where very few people will look at the back except for us fellow quilters. So we've got all of our things cut, backing, binding. I've still got a few more of my trees to cut out, but we're ready to go. So that's what you need to get done for this week.